Okay. So what I find interesting is to the extent of how we sort of get into our own little worlds. Um, I find that interesting, right? So as an academic, I sort of go within the circles of academia. My wife is a healthcare professional. She goes within the circles of her healthcare professionalism or professionals. I've got a brother that's in construction, and he goes within the circles of construction. And, um, you know, I think it's interesting in how we go within little circles in our lives. And we sort of reflect culturally um, the sort of circles that you go into, and worlds are really pretty small in terms of what we actually do and our day-to-day life. And it's fascinating to me that we sort of miss out on the bigger picture of a lot of things. So I was thinking about like how different our lives actually are in many ways across um, of just everything, right? Like somebody like me in India is going to have a much different experience than what I'm experiencing right now in North America. Or, somebody, a taxi driver in Malaysia is just like living a completely different life than what I live. And I'm just struck by how we live. And the interesting thing is that when you're in those circles, that's your world, that's your little circle that you're in, and that's what you think about, and that's what you're about. And I just find it entirely fascinating that we live within these circles, and we live, um, you know, so sort of smallly, and yet we have so many people in this world, all doing all sorts of different things, and yet we're all living different lives and doing different things. One thing you might be sort of thinking about while I'm describing all of this stuff that goes on, couldn't other people find out about that? Well, yeah, but at the same time, like only a few thousand people ever sort of pay attention to any of the things that I say and describe this kind of stuff. And I just want to say like how little of the worlds we actually live in, and kind of like to some ways are almost closed off. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like we often think of that as a bad thing, but I don't think it is. I think that's the way we manage life, and actually that's kind of nice to be able to do that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to say how interesting it is that we live in these tiny little worlds all around. And all of us have these little tiny worlds, and you might want to look into somebody else's world, but you never quite sort of look into that world. And we're just doing our thing all over, um, making sense of our worlds and interacting just within our own little worlds. It's just fascinating to me, to be honest, to think about how we all have our own individual worlds, and yet we're still interacting and doing things. And, something that goes on in, the Malaysian taxi driver, for example. If there's a whole bunch of Malaysian taxi drivers that don't work all at once, it does eventually affect me way over here on the opposite side of the planet. And I just think it's really fascinating how we have all of us live in our own little worlds, and nobody really kind of knows what the worlds we live in. And we all have sort of different cultural things that are going on. Um, but we all kind of get along. It's one of the more modern miracles. I guess it's a miracle of just humanity, of society as a whole, is how we are all so in our own little pockets, right? Like I would say on a day-to-day basis, I probably only interact with, like Some days it might be a lot of people, but on a day-to-day basis, maybe it's a half a dozen people that I might sort of interact with, and my world is entirely very small. Maybe over the course of a year, other than doing this whole social media thing, it might be no more than a couple thousand people that I ever interact with. And yet, everybody has those couple thousand people that are interacting with, and we just are so much in our own little worlds. We think about our little things that happen to us, and we think that everybody else's world is the same, but it's really not. We have a lot of differences, and we all face different challenges and different benefits, different costs and benefits of being in these different little worlds. And it's just incredibly fascinating how we all view the world differently because of the little worlds that we live in. Even though we have so many people, one would think that our worlds would collide and we would have all similarities between them, but it's really not. Right, like the number of academics that are in my field that have, my perspective is honestly, it's me. There might be some people that somewhat overlap, but not entirely. They have much different backgrounds than me at different places and all sorts of different things. So it's really just me out of 7.5 billion people doing the things that I'm doing in my own little world. And then you might be, I don't know, maybe you're an accountant, for example, and you're living in your little tiny world. And you're the only kind of accountant that does this certain kind of accountancy in this particular location. So you yourself are in your own little world. I just find it so cool to think about that. We have so many people that live in this world, and one perspective is that we're all the same and we have all this sort of universalities. But another perspective is we're incredibly different, and we are in a lot of ways because we live in these our own little worlds. And I think that is cool to sort of view this and take a step back and say, wait a minute, my world is not like your world. And that's okay. And I think what we could do is share our experiences of what these worlds look like. And maybe people can sort of see what it's like, but at the same time, generally, you just have to live your little world, and then like you're pretty inconsequential. Even if you're a really famous person and all that kind of stuff, you're still inconsequential over the long run. So it's somewhat depressing to think about, but at the other side, it's a relief that I could do a lot of things and I'm still okay. To think about, you could do all sorts of things, all sorts of wrongs, and goof up in many different ways, and you're still okay. It's amazing. I think it's amazing anyways. So enjoy your little world today. It's pretty unique, and nobody else lives in your little world. And yet we all kind of get along. All right, so that's all I want to talk about, because I think it's an important thing to remember. So we're all unique. We all live in our own little worlds. We have our own little perspectives, and that's okay. All right, take care. And thanks so much for listening, everybody. Shane, I want to say thank you. Sunila, Clint, Jason, and Richard, thanks so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Bye.